After spending over 15 years in the State House, including terms as Majority Leader and Speaker, Brendan Sharkey now chairs the Advisory Commission on Intergovernmental Relations. Called ACIR for short, it helps study systemic issues between state and local governments, and compiles a list of unfunded mandates on municipalities that is anything but short. He joins us today on the Municipal Voice to discuss state-local relations, and how both sides can continue to improve our cooperation for a better Connecticut. We'd like to thank our premier sponsor, Digital Back Office Palo Alto Networks. Check them out at digitalbackoffice.com or paloaltonetworks.com, as well as our sponsors at Gateway and Housatonic Community Colleges. The Municipal Voice is the Connecticut Conference of Municipalities podcast in collaboration with WNHH LP 103.5 FM. I'm your host, Matt Ford. As always, be sure to give us a like and let us know what you're thinking in the comments. CCM's Municipal Voice podcast continues to present a key forum on important state-local issues. The views expressed do not necessarily reflect the consensus views of CCM or member municipal leaders. Brendan, thanks for joining us today.
Thanks, Matt. Thanks for having me on.
Good to have you back on the show. It's been a while.
Yeah.
So currently, you serve as the chair of the Advisory Committee on Intergovernmental Relations, ACIR for short. Can you tell the audience at home a little bit about what that is and what your role is there?
Sure. ACIR is a statutorily created commission of state government that is designed to facilitate issues between state government and local government. It consists of representatives and appointees of different interests, local government appointees from legislative leaders. We have union representation. We have folks from the governor's appointees and others from state government, and also state agencies like CCM obviously is a major player on that, as well as the Superintendents Association and the boards of education. Everyone sends a representative to the commission meetings and are members of the commission. And it's really designed. It's been around for almost 30 years now, actually.
Okay.
And it's designed to facilitate that communication that I described. But in the last couple of years, my role, I was appointed by Governor Lamont to be chair of the commission. And in my tenure, which started right in the middle of the pandemic, I felt that there was a real opportunity to expand ACIR into a more robust kind of organization that could really take on some of the big issues that are happening with local government in particular this year.
Yeah, I know. I think you were working at some point with Rick Torres, who was with United Way at that time, but now he's actually helping us out at CCM with some of our equity efforts. Right. And in that, you guys did talk about a refocus of ACIR, despite it'd been around for 30 years, but at certain times it kind of, not to say lull, but you saw the need for a refocus. Why did you think that refocus really was important?
Well, I think that what was happening was that it was ACIR had a very important mission, but that I think due to in large part due to lack of staffing and lack of resources, it had relegated itself to something that was a little bit less dynamic. Yeah. Something that was designed to do more study of issues and consultation about issues that folks thought were important. But I felt that there was probably a more relevant role that it could play, particularly in the pandemic and post-pandemic, as we reimagined local government and reimagined, the age-old questions of how we do regionalism, in particular, but also how local government needs to function in a post-pandemic world. Yeah. And in that context, we created a subcommittee of ACIR called the Local Government of the Future.
Okay.
Committee, which itself has taken on some bigger issues that we've all in an effort to try to help towns and cities in particular reimagine what local government can look like as we go forward.
That's very cool. In intergovernmental relations, and one of the things you kind of look at is you study system issues, as it were. And I think an interesting question might be, where do those issues arise from? Is there miscommunication often between state and local government, or is this just kind of the nature of governance?
Well, sometimes we get assignments given to us by the legislature. Legislature has kind of taken notice of the fact that we're trying to be a little bit more direct and more robust on some of the topics that we're taking on. But most of the work that we do is organic. It comes from the members themselves who raise these issues for the group's consideration. And from there, we try to figure out what resources we can actually apply to take on that issue. And if we have the interest and the resources, then it becomes something that we'll take on as a group and issue. Takes several months to kind of dig into it, and then produce a report when we're done.
Yeah, that's cool. The importance of having all those different kind of stakeholders from different arenas in the group to not only help come up with the solutions, but also to bring attention to the issues that are particular to whatever their specialty is. Yeah.
That's right. Hopefully, and in any given month, we may have one or more topics that folks on who are members of the commission will come forward with something that they've come across over the course in the last month or two that they want to bring to ACIR to take a deeper dive into. And we vote on it and we make decisions based on that.
Yeah. Because CCM is a part of this, and one of our perennial big issues is what we refer to as unfunded mandates, which is where the state passes a law on something that the towns have to do, but doesn't necessarily put in money for them to then do that with. So they have to find that money elsewhere, usually in Connecticut through property tax. ACIR compiles a report about these. Can you tell us a little bit about that report?
Sure. That's one of those things that is assigned to us by the legislature. And it is
part of the charge of the organization.
Right. Yeah. And actually, it wasn't part of the original charge 30 years ago, but it became one of those things that the legislature assigned to us as a topic, as a report that we have to produce for them. And essentially, it's a perennial report on what just happened in the most recent legislative session to help identify what new mandates may have been approved or passed by the legislature. And also a cumulative list of, that report also includes a kind of a cumulative list of all of the mandates that are out.
That are already on the books, yeah.
Right. And so this is also with an eye towards kind of modernizing ACIR a little bit. Our one staff person who does incredible work from OPM, Bruce Witchin, he's the one who typically puts these reports together. And he has proposed that we perhaps make that document a little bit more robust, if I can use that word again, in that we may find that certain, in any given year or over the course of years, things have been given the title mandate, but we don't often follow up on that to determine, one person's mandate is another person's report. Let's put it that way. Some mandates are more onerous. Some mandates are not. Yeah. Some mandates come with a lot of hue and cry over and hand-wringing over what this is now going to demand in terms of resources from our local governments, and then don't pan out to be quite such an onerous obligation.
Yeah.
So this year, when we produce our report on this, we're going to actually try to dig a little deeper into those mandates and do an after the fact report on, this was passed 5 years ago, but really it has not turned out to be quite as big an issue or an obligation as we may have thought. On the other hand, this other mandate has in fact turned out to be really complicated, and maybe we need to actually ask the legislature or recommend that the legislature peel back some of this to relieve the burden that's imposing on cities.
Yeah, I mean, I think it says in the report somewhere that it shouldn't be considered a hit list of like bad statutes. You know, there's some things in there that are mandates that are necessary. You know, public health things, other things like that. They're mandated by law.
Right.
But it sounds like what you're trying to do through the study is kind of separate it out from the politics of some of them. You know, take out the popularity or unpopularity and look at the numbers and the actual cost and return on investment from these different things to really determine what needs to be changed.
That's right. That's the idea. Again, in an effort to make that report more than just sort of an annual.
You are listening to the Municipal Voice on WNHH 103.5 FM. Is there an obligation from the state to help bring these down or to fully fund resources to towns and cities like Pilot or ECS?
Of course there is. Well, you know, we're talking now at a time when the state has more money than they know what to do with. Let's be honest. That's in part because of what had been a surging stock market until recently, as well as the infusion of federal pandemic relief money.
The ARP, the rescue plan, and stuff like that.
Right. Yeah. So as a result, there's I joke with the current speaker, Matt Ritter, about the fact that he was a legislator when I was speaker and a chair of a committee when I was speaker, but boy, oh boy, he has it easy compared to those of us who had to walk through those deficit years.
Yeah.
When there was just not enough money coming in. There were some structural problems with state government in how it spent money, how it collected money, which led to the kind of deficits that we were facing year over year prior to the pandemic. And, you know, there was this problem, this perennial problem of, I think Ben Barnes, the OPM secretary back in 2012, kind of referred to it as deficits as far as the eye can see.
Yeah.
Well, you know, when you're in that kind of environment, you have to start reneging. I hate to say it, but you wind up reneging on some of the promises that you've made out of necessity. And as a result,
as the pilot and those kind of programs that are supposed to help fund and help out towns that have a lot of property off the tax rolls
for the brunt of that, and therefore property taxes had to go up because there was not the sufficient funds from the state as promised to fulfill the obligations, and that put a huge burden on towns. I think this last session, there was, I think, a very significant and important effort underway to right that wrong and to start getting back to full funding of pilot and full funding of other state mandated grants and matching funds to cities and towns to help lift that burden off. But personally, I think I think we need to go bigger in state government. I think there is enough money right now to do what in my day when I was speaker was a pipe dream. It was impossible to think of. But I think that we should seriously be thinking about taking on the mother of all state mandates, which is special education.
Yeah.
I think that is one of the I think it is, in fact, the most onerous state mandate that we place on cities and towns through our boards of ed.
Yeah.
Because the costs of special ed are so variable, depending upon what families and students are added to the school district in any given year,
Mm-hmm.
those kinds of costs are not easily defined.
Yeah.
And it puts towns, boards of ed and towns in a position of having to deal with all those variables, and you might get lucky one year and then unlucky the next year. If the state actually funded special education,
Yeah.
it would cost a couple $1 billion. It's in the billions of dollars.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But if the state took that on in a more fully flushed out way, still giving towns and cities control over how their programs will run.
Mm-hmm.
But if the state could actually do that, we would lift a huge property tax burden off towns and cities, and assume what I think in most other states already happens, which is either state or county government picks up that tab.
Yeah.
We don't place it on cities and towns.
Because one special education student can, for a small town, moving in can totally skew the budget one way or the other, or leaving town even.
Right. And I don't want to get overly wonky about it, but it's not just about, that's absolutely true. But the other problem is that we have unfortunately adopted a legal precedent in Connecticut where we place the burden on the school district to explain why the student is not getting certain levels of education services. Whereas in every other state, that burden, we call the burden of proof, is placed on the parents to explain why they should be getting a particular service. And that burden of proof problem, again, Connecticut is one of only a few states in the country that has established that burden. But that burden really goes away if the state actually assumes it, because then it's a statewide standard. It's not district by district by district. The state creates the standard. Everybody works the same way. That I think would be a huge, even though the state would pay a lot to cover special ed for cities and towns, the reality is the state as a whole in aggregate would spend a lot less in special education if the state assumed.
There'd be efficiencies in the state handling special ed across the state. Yeah.
That's right.
Especially, I'm thinking like administration and some of those sort of areas.
But also some of these legal obligations that currently are literally litigated, town by town, district by district. If the state was the one who was actually running and paying for the programs, you wouldn't be able to have. And I God bless the parents of special ed kids. I'm not casting aspersions on wanting to do what they can do, the best they can do for their kids. But a lot of parents district shop. They'll go to one district. If they see that somebody in the district next door is getting this service, the burden is on their district to explain why they're not providing what's being provided in the district next door. And this goes on and on all over the state. There are lawyers who are making gazillions of dollars.
Yeah, that's interesting to think about when we talk about these sort of things. We think about the teacher salary and that as education expenses, but in this case, it's lawyer fees.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Not to get too far into those weeds, but
that's what this show is for. We get in the municipal weeds.
Yeah, that's a really dynamic thing that we are in a position to start doing this year if we want to find a way to find money well spent.
Yeah. And just talking about some of that money, how currently the state does have more money that has in a long time because of that influx. But a lot of that federal money they got is sort of a one-time deal, isn't it? So it's figuring out how to spend it wisely is a big part of that too, and something that will continue.
Right. The strings attached to the federal money.
We can't just pay off the debts or.
Right. Well, that, and also it can't be used for an ongoing budget expenses. It has to be more of a capital related initiative or economic development related initiatives. So I think there are some protections from using some of that one-time money for ongoing
Yeah.
systemic change to how we do budgeting. But even so, I should also mention, and I'm very happy about this this past year, that we are using the deficit wisely, and something that I've also really felt strongly about is eliminating the car tax, the property tax on cars. The governor took a significant step in that direction by creating a statewide mill rate cap on how much towns and cities can assess cars that are the same from town to town.
Yeah.
I've long been an advocate for that because that is the most
regressive
and onerous tax that we charge in Connecticut, and we're, again, the only state in the country that doesn't. So we took a significant step. I think we should just eliminate it entirely, frankly.
Yeah.
It's actually not a big price tag for the state to do it, and give the towns and cities money that they would otherwise lose in car tax revenue.
Yeah, that is, of course, for us at CCM, is that when we hear get rid of the car tax, we're like, yeah, we don't like the car tax either, but that money currently is going to towns. If it just went away, that would be a problem.
That's no question about it. Right.
Yeah.
Right.
So you recently looked at virtual options for town meetings, and you found that 90% of communities supported them. How do you take that kind of information and disseminate it? Does a report go to the legislature or the governor to look at?
Well, that's another example of a study that was undertaken by ACIR by assignment from the legislature.
Okay.
So the Planning and Development Committee passed that bill and asked ACIR to look into the question of whether remote meetings is here to stay or not, and whether that's a good idea and why. Again, so that fell very nicely into this local government of the future initiative that we took on, because that's obviously a key question that folks were raising. The legislature had allowed towns and cities to do remote meetings, but only through April 30th of this year, of 2022.
Yeah, it was all supposed to be, at least in theory, temporary, or at least the authorization to do it that way was temporary. Yeah.
That's right. So the study was required to be produced and completed before the legislature came into session in February, so that the legislature could make a decision as to whether or not they wanted to continue to authorize and allow towns and cities to do that. Yeah, and what we did was we developed a set of questions using a basic Google survey document. Again, Bruce Witchin, our staff person, really kind of discovered this option available to us, and we disseminated to anybody and everybody, all the folks on our mailing lists, and through the other organizations that are members of ACIR. And we produced results. And unfortunately, we do have staff. We don't have the kind of staffing that is. So I literally spent a weekend. They were not the kind of yes or no questions. Check a box, yes, no. They were nuanced questions. Giving verbal responses. Yeah. What do you think we should do about X or Y? So I spent a weekend myself culling through the almost 300 responses we received, to categorize them and chop them up into bite-sized pieces so that we could sort of summarize that. And we found that when asked the question, do you think that remote meetings in some form or another should continue to exist in Connecticut at the local level, the answer was overwhelming. Absolutely.
Yeah.
The other message was, yes, absolutely, but don't dictate from the state what form those meetings should take. Leave it to cities and towns to decide whether they want to do remote meetings, whether they want to go back to all in-person meetings. Don't force us to do remote or hybrid meetings where you can have the meeting in the room and then folks participating remotely. Let us make up our minds on that. Give us some of the resources that we need, but otherwise, let us decide that. And that's, in fact, what garnered, I think, all the support from the legislature on a bipartisan basis.
Yeah, just let the towns decide. Don't mandate that they do it one way or the other, but make it possible for them to decide to do it that way.
Right. And interestingly, in listening to the debate over the bill that our study produced, the folks who were opposed to the bill were arguing that perhaps we were giving local government too much discretion to avoid contact with the public. If we continued remote meetings, there might be an inclination to not interact in person anymore.
That people do stuff behind closed doors or something.
Right, right. And that was a legitimate point, I think, that was being raised, and a concern that was being raised. But my attitude about that is, look, if a local government wants to do everything remotely and the people in that town don't like it, then they need to speak up.
Yeah.
If people in town want to do stuff in person, well, then they need to tell their local elected officials.
Yeah. And I think in a lot of places they found, as they started doing these virtual meetings, they were worried about it first, but in the end, they probably got more participation in a lot of places from the public because they didn't have to take time off work or drive downtown, find someone to watch the kid while they did it. Everyone could hop on the computer, either just listen or put their 2 cents in it.
Right. That was the number one reason why people felt that we should continue, right? Convenience. Because, and the results speak for themselves. During the pandemic, there was much more local participation when remote meetings became the norm. Suddenly, folks came out and started participating in meetings that had never done so before, and that's a good thing.
When you were speaker, you thought to relook at the way Connecticut does services, which prompted some reports that we've talked about. One of the focuses of that stuff was the councils of government, which have recently been upgraded to county equivalency in lieu of having actual county government in Connecticut. How can ACIR look at these new designations and help funnel state government funds in perhaps a more equitable way?
Yeah, that's a great question. One of our achievements in 2021 was this is getting to the answer to your question, was the reallocation of an existing grant that we collect from hotel taxes and car rentals to promote regional efficiencies. And we repurposed those grants specifically to COGS and on the education side to RESCs, who want to provide services at the COG and RESC level that are otherwise being done individually by their member towns. And that's now up and running.
Yeah.
I think it's clear that COGS and RESCs are the future.
The rest are the regional school...
The regional education service centers.
Okay, yeah.
In every state, actually, there are equivalents to our RESCs. I think of, in the greater Hartford area, CREC, and in the greater New Haven area, ACIR. There are only 6 of them, and they have different geographies. There's LEARN in southeastern Connecticut. So those entities are made up of the boards of ed and members of the boards of ed of each of their constituent districts. They're the equivalent of COGS on the education side. But there's no question that if we're going to get to a serious approach to lowering property taxes, which is the most, far and away the largest amount of taxes that we charge Connecticut residents, is through the property tax. If we're ever going to get a hold on that and lower those taxes, we have to be doing things, yes, on a more efficient basis, but really on a regional basis. And the way to do that is through our COGS and RESCs. It's not enough to just have 2 towns agree to buy the street sweeper together, and that's somehow regionalism. No, that's not regionalism. Regionalism is the COG contracting for a fleet of street sweepers that are shared by all of the towns in that region. Yeah. So that not any one town has to bear that burden exclusively. It's that type of approach that the COGS and RESCs really are going to have to take on. And really our goal, I know within ACIR, our goal is to empower the COGS and RESCs to do more and more and more as we rethink how local government is done.
Yeah.
The best example I can offer, assessor's offices,
Mm-hmm.
right? There's no reason why every town and city in Connecticut needs to have their own assessment offices.
Yeah.
It's a fairly straightforward function. There's a lot of, obviously, if you got rid of the car tax, you'd solve probably about 60% of what the assessors do every day. But it's a function that can happen on a regional basis in a central office where the COGs are located. And you don't have to hire the staff at every town hall to do the work that assessors do. It can be done in a centralized location and without any impact on the taxpayer and the services provided. That's the kind of thing that we really need to invest and place at the COG level, and not continue to do it on a town-by-town basis.
We always kind of like to end looking towards the future. And so I want to ask, is there anything the ACIR is looking at in the future that is interesting that you'd like to share with us? What are you excited about coming up?
Yeah, well, we are taking on a few things this year. One is this question about property tax that we've been talking about. And we hope to be working with Commissioner Boughton at DRS, who is the governor's point person on property taxes. And we are doing a whole range of studies on that we using different resources on how to go about doing that. We're also looking at how we can, again, through the COGS in particular, how we can maximize federal funds through the COGS. What are the ways in which other states use their county governments to leverage federal money that, for us, sits on the table? We don't get the money back from Washington that we should be. And that's in large part because other states leverage their county governments to actually access that in a very professional way. We're going to take a look at that.
So the county equivalency for the COGS that we talked about before, that's what's going on there, is you need them.
Right. So the county equivalency issue it fits into that whole equation. We also are going to look at some of those reporting mechanisms that towns and cities do, reports to the state, talking about state mandates, right? All the various and sundry reports that we ask our cities and towns and boards of ed to report to the state. We're going to take a look at those and see what, if any of those are really effective and useful, and whether we can recommend that some of those actually be eliminated. And then finally, we're going to look, we as a body and as a commission are going to look at asking for additional staff. Being a truly independent commission with its own staff that would function either through the executive branch or the legislative branch, but with full-time staff that can actually facilitate the kinds of studies that we really need to take on, not relying on academic institutions and interns to do the studies for us, but actually have our own staffing that can supplement what Bruce Witchin does for us on a part-time basis. So we can really be a real resource that's effective. Yeah.
And you're hoping that might happen sometime like that?
We're going to ask for that in next year's, the 2023 biennial budget. We're going to ask the governor if he would consider that as part of his budget.
Very cool.
Assuming he's reelected, whoever that governor may be, I shouldn't.
We'll find out, and
it looks like it'll be a he, one way or the other. Yes.
Most likely. Well, Brendan Sharkey, thank you so much for joining us today. We really appreciate it.
Thanks, Matt. I appreciate being on. Always a pleasure.
We'd like to thank our guest, Brendan Sharkey. I'd like to thank our premier sponsors, Digital Back Office Palo Alto Networks, who you can check out at digitalbackoffice.com or paloaltonetworks.com, as well as our sponsors, Gateway Community College and Housatonic Community College. Learn more at gatewayct.edu and housatonic.edu. Municipal Voice is a co-production by CCM and WNHH 103.5 FM. Kevin Maloney is our executive producer, Christopher Gilson is our producer, Harry Draws on the boards, and I'm Matt Ford, your host. Be sure to check out our Facebook page and give us a like, and watch out for a CCM chat series on our YouTube page. If you enjoy the Municipal Voice and are interested in more news and insights on local government, you can read CCM's flagship magazine, Connecticut Town and City. It's the indispensable news source for anyone who wants to stay up to date on any issues affecting Connecticut's towns and cities. It's free, and the summer issue is out now and available at ccm-ct.org.